Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that are read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's a mental health advocate, no other than Mr. Patrick Ehlers. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Patrick, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Absolutely, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me for today. And hello to everybody out there. My name is Patrick Eilers. I am a licensed professional counselor, professional life coach. I've been a therapist for about the last 8 years, going into my ninth year this year, 2025. So, been a general practitioner. I've kind of worked with a lot of different diagnoses throughout my career. Worked with a lot of different, men, women. Been worked with adolescents, worked with kids for a while, beginning of my career. The last 4 years, I've been specifically working with sexual addiction. So that's a kind of a new area or not a new area last 4 years, but certainly more of a specific area since 2020. So I worked for a practice that specializes in that kind of type of recovery. So going into 2025, I'm actually going to be starting my own mental health wellness coaching practice. And so I'm going to be back to a solo practitioner and kind of working to try to help people in their overall mental wellness. And so this is a book that I've used in the past to talk to different folks about. I know in the recovery program that we work in, we've talked a lot about this book as far as being impacting people and helping people and changing their behavior and working toward becoming the people that they'd like to become.
Mr. Patrick, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. And how does Atomic Habits explain the relationship between small habits to long-term mental health?
Yeah, what I like about it is, there's certainly some really good practical steps in there. I think certainly the idea of being able to put things around your environment as being an adjustment to helping you succeed in changing your habits is a big part of that. I know for me, when I talk a lot about like we were talking about earlier, the kind of the recovery aspect of things. Even just putting small boundaries around like your phone, not having your phone in the bedroom or the bathroom make a huge impact on avoiding behaviors that you don't want to do, wasting time, and some of those kind of things for sure. So, Atomic Habits talks a lot about that same kind of idea. Putting things in your environment that help remind you of things that you're working towards. So, I know one of the examples they give in there is if you want to drink more water, put water bottles in your room. If you want to do some of the things around, want to read more, put books that you want to read around your environment. So, I think environment plays a large role in that. So, I do appreciate that part of it. I think that they do hit some important factors in that when they're talking about it. Another area that I really liked about it was the idea of identity. And I think for everybody as human beings, we all kind of work through trying to understand who we are. And one of the things he talks a little bit about is looking at identity as I'm not getting to reach my identity. It's something that I already am doing currently. And I know when I work with a lot with folks who struggle with shame and guilt in their behavior that they've done in the past, sometimes they have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to, change their behavior or change their life. And so you really kind of focus on the idea of what are they doing today? How are they becoming? And the book talks about becoming 1% better today. And so that's really important because I think the more we're working toward being 1% better, that's going to continue to have some momentum. And so one of the things he talks about is it kind of stacks on top of one another. Today is today. We can't change what we did yesterday, but we can change what we're going to do today and moving toward tomorrow. So I think that's really kind of brings that in together nicely about that. And especially from a perspective of behavior that we want to get away from, I think those are some really good points to start moving us toward that. And I appreciate that about this book.
Yes, people were talking about Atomic Habits by James Clear, award best-selling New York Times best-selling author. So, Mr. Patrick, in what ways do habits shape our mental well-being according to the book?
Well, definitely the behavior patterns that we have really affect whether or not, especially when you think about how we think about inside our own thoughts. So observing thoughts is a pretty big factor. And he talks a little bit about this idea of just identifying, what we're doing that are positive or negative. He calls it a habit self or habit. Uh, it's a let me get it wrong here. Basically a habit scorecard. That's what he's looking. That's what it is. And he talks about this idea of looking at your behaviors and giving yourself an idea of okay, it's a neutral behavior or a positive behavior or a negative behavior, and kind of ranking that. From a perspective of mental health, I think that certainly is something that would be really helpful. It's helpful for everyone to look at. What behaviors am I doing that are, things that are building me closer to being the person I want to be? Again, kind of back to the identity piece. What behaviors do I need to eliminate or need to change in my life that move me further from being that person? And then what are the things that are neutral? Neutral things are like, getting up and, doing my normal things, going to the bathroom, taking a shower, those kind of things are more neutral, right? They're not positive or negative. So I think from a mental health perspective, mental health wellness perspective, these behaviors that we do help us to become the people that we want to be. And so from a perspective of what are we becoming is really about, are we spending more time, getting further from the people we want to be, or are we getting closer? And especially from the idea of things like doom scrolling and things that kind of just make us avoid things that we don't want to necessarily deal with. We need to identify those behaviors, be aware of those behaviors, and then being able to can move us to changing them. He actually quotes, I think in the book, he quotes Carl Jung and the idea that unless we bring some of these things to conscious and have awareness of them, we're just going to call it fate, or we're going to call it, destiny, or whatever we believe in that sense. There's not going to be things that we're going to do that are actually actively changing. So I think this book does provide some really good insights on how to be able to practically apply some of those things and move toward, being in a mental health way, be able to be more focused on how to be healthier overall.
So, Mr. Patrick, do you think in the future you can write the same genre book?
Well, I certainly think I could. I probably could bring some things into play there. I like some of the things. I've used some of the things that he's talked about. I've shared some of the videos they've had as far as some of the things some of the concepts he's talked about. I think writing is one of those things, at least for me, in my experience, writing is one of those things where you have to progressively keep at it. And so kind of the same idea he's talking about, that's you stack those behaviors on top of one another. And all the things I've written that have been longer or larger projects are always involved, like, just being persistent and continuing to pursue that. I know for me, like, one of the things I like to write, but I need to write with a purpose. And so I do think being able to bring some of these things that I've experienced two words that would definitely be something that would be benefit for people. And so I think that's hopefully I answered your question, but I think the answer is yes. I certainly could probably write some things there, but it's just like anything, there you have to have a vision to that. And so I think that would be a big part of where I would want to think more about that.
Looking forward for that, Mr. Patrick, and you are most welcome to come back and let's promote your first best-selling book. So, what does James Clear suggest that making tiny changes can improve mental health over time?
So like we talked about some of those small changes already. A few of those, as far as being able to put water bottles in the the environment, changing your environment, those kind of things. But I do think the earth in our area, maybe that he speaks to, is this idea of certainly monitoring your thoughts, like we just talked about before, going back and looking at some of the maybe even doing like a journal. I think journaling is something that is underrated. A lot of people don't do that, so it's being able to be more aware of what your own internalized dialogue is. The more you know your dialogue, the more, like we said, we can bring that to conscious. More we can work on changing those things. I think on our practical application of some things that I've seen, at least in my work, that is being able to identify where like he talks about trigger points, and that's kind of a bit of an overused term these days, but certainly this idea of there's certain things that kind of set us off, right? There's certain things that make us go a certain direction. And when we can identify those, we can either, acknowledge them and be able to handle it differently, or avoid them in some cases, depending on what they are. But he talks about, kind of pairing those together, like something that's healthy with an unhealthy habit. So like, if we don't like to do something specifically, then follow that up with something we do like to do specifically, or vice versa. So being able to kind of pair those together can be a big part of that. The brain likes to operate doing the same thing over and over again, which is a very efficient way of processing the world. But at the same time, it gets efficient in doing things that are unhealthy sometimes. So that's where we have to kind of work within ourselves of, practically looking at, okay, am I just doing this because I'm not even thinking about it? Or am I doing this because this is something that I'm familiar with, I'm comfortable with? I think that's a lot of those things play a role in that. Certainly, what we eat, what we choose to, where we choose to go, we choose to spend our time. A lot of those kind of things are sometimes they feel like they're a bit unconscious. So, the more awareness we have to them, I think, can help to drive us to a different direction.
Very well said, Mr. Patrick. Very well said. So, what role do habits play in managing stress, anxiety, and other mental health challenges?
Well, they definitely play a large role for sure. So I would say that from a perspective of all three of those. So like, I think the more, so anxiety tends to be the one I'll use that as the example. Anxiety tends to be one of those things that tends to loop. Usually it doesn't, it tends to go from kind of, this is one fear I have or one thought I have, and it kind of keeps going down the path. I think when we do certain things that consistently put us in that sort of anxious space, if we don't do things that are helpful to help us to break from those thoughts, those can become our norm. We can think through those thoughts very easily. It's almost an automatic pattern. So you get up, and the first thing you have is a fear that you might have experienced from the day before. Or maybe you think about earlier in the week, whatever. Maybe it's something going on at work. Maybe it's something in your interpersonal relationships, whatever that might be. And you focus, and you just don't break from that thought. You keep focusing on it. And the more you focus on it, that's almost like a habit to that degree, because that's what you're normally used to focusing on. And that can lead to a lot of worst case scenario thinking, kind of what they call catastrophizing. And so what ends up happening is you kind of go down that path, further and further and further, because you're not getting away from that particular thing. And that is a little bit of a habitual type behavior. What we eat can play a role in that, right? If there's things that elevate our blood pressure or things that make us feel certain ways, those are things that can add to that as well. So that can be kind of habitual in that way. I know, like, I love coffee, but if we drink 6 or 7 cups of it, probably going to have a little bit of we're going to feel a little more anxious because our blood pressure is going to be up and our heart's going to be racing and those kind of things. So I think that it's a space where the habits do play a little bit of a role, but it's more of our healthy habits that really help break some of those things. So I think it's more about doing the things like meditating, like connecting with our own thoughts, like journaling. We just talked a little bit about. It's the things that are going to help us to be more focused on giving back to our people, less focused on what we're experiencing, kind of thing. I think those bigger picture kind of ideas that help us those are healthier habits to engage with. Than things that are a little bit more what I consider kind of organic or mindless. We don't take a lot of thought to do them. So the more we're focused on the things that are healthy for us, I think that those habits are really ones we want to cultivate. Like I said, some of those are, like, we just kind of gave you a couple examples there, but going for a walk, physical activity is a huge piece of that. Doesn't have to be you're running 10 miles, but doing something that just even moving around a little bit is helpful. Definitely talked about eating earlier, eating things that are healthy for us. Focusing on things that are hobbies that help us grow and challenge us. Those are a big thing. Not just kind of isolating and playing video games or being on the screen or whatever that looks like. So I think those are all the habits I want to probably say or promote in that way to bring kind of full circle, because those are the things, if we can build those into our life, we're going to have a lot more outcome of being in a healthier space. And this book, I think, definitely talks a little bit about kind of consistently doing that and doing the things that are beneficial for us. Like we talked about earlier, the scorecard idea. Those would be things we want to definitely put in the plus category.
So, Mr. Patrick, how can the concept of habit stacking be used to create positive mental health habits?
The more positive things we do, like you're talking about earlier, the more likely that we're going to consistently be able to do things that are with the positive outcome. Like I said earlier, the brain likes to do the same thing over and over again. So that the hows of that are, if we do one positive thing, let's say you go for a walk, and that elevates your mood. That if you consistently do that, then you're building that as a regular, consistent behavior. Now, just like you would if you were doing the opposite, you were getting away from that. So I really think that the how of that is that our brain actually, like, the reality is our brain has multiple, like, internally, it has what I like consider like little freeways or little roads. And when we have those healthy behaviors, it's basically that pathway is something we like to do over and over again. That helps us to maintain that space. Now, there's still other ones of unhealthy behaviors within our brain as well. Those other roads are what they kind of become dormant. They don't become as operational. I'll use that word. And so because they're not as operational, they're things that we like to kind of go to the ones we're using more and more. So that's where healthy habits, I think, really come into play, because the biological. So when you look at things like addiction, most of the time people use unhealthy roadways to get from kind of point A to point B in their brain. And those things do help us feel better in the short term, but in the long term, they create unhealthy behavior. And so that's really, I guess, if you're saying the how in that sense, there's a physiological part of our brain that actually has a little freeway, so to speak. And the wider that freeway is, the more likely our brain probably is going to want to go back to it. Like I said, it's pretty efficient in that sense. So hopefully that answers the how in that sense of at least some of the biological part of it.
So, what will be your advice for those as having a mental breakdown right now?
If you were having a mental breakdown,
Yes.
okay. Well, I think the biggest thing is if you feel like you're having, if you're really struggling with stress right now. I mean, the first thing is, what's your connection look like? Do you have people right now that you're able to connect with? If you're having an emergency, obviously, some type of a crisis, there's definitely crisis hotlines out there that are good. They're available. 988 is a good one for like suicide hotline. If you're having something like that, that would definitely be the first place to go. But again, connecting with people is really a big part. If you feel like you're overly stressed right now and you're struggling with whatever's going on in life, I think connecting with people is a first step. And then we talked about earlier, the physical activity piece, certainly moving around, getting out of one space, doing a small trip might be something that'll be helpful depending if you're able to do that. I definitely think, beyond the connecting piece is just being able to find, people who have likeness that are similar, that are part of your support system. And developing that support system. I think that's another part of it. It's not just to have people that are available, people who genuinely care and people who you're connected with. The more isolated people are, the more likely they're going to probably, continue to feel isolated. The more likely they're going to be stressed by that. I think stress in general tends to be something that, we don't necessarily always know how to navigate, but in that navigation, it's really about, we can't always change what's happening outside of us, but maybe we can make those stressors less impactful in that way. So when we do healthy habits, back to the idea of the book, when we do healthy things, those help to lower sort of the stress level internally. And when we have less stress, we feel more willing to connect with people and do things that are healthy for us in that way. So I think besides reaching out and connecting with people, I think, the more things we can connect with ourselves is a big part of that. And that's where we talked about kind of earlier, identity is a big part of that. Knowing who we are, knowing what we're going to do, and being connected with that is a big part of it.
Yes, people, if you need help, ask for help. That's a big crucial thing to do.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Patrick, what will be your short term and long term goals as a mental health advocate?
Well, long-term goal, I would say right now is to get my business up and running. I've been in that process in the last few months, kind of getting that going. So really developing. My hope is eventually or my goal is to eventually have that branch out beyond just the one-on-one coaching, to working with mental health practices and developing them, helping them develop therapists and kind of therapist development in the practice. What I see is the therapist turnover is super high, so the more turnover of therapists you have, the more likely you're not going to have connection within helping the clients as much. And so the goal is to help clients. So if we can have good, healthy cultures within the practices, then we'll be able to do that more effectively. The other thing, that's a little bit of a short term, a little bit of a long term at the same time, but is to start a support group for teachers, for people who are in K through 12 teaching groups. So kind of that's a population of folks that doesn't have a lot of support. Certainly looking forward to doing some of that. That's the hope. Long term, I'd like to see myself eventually start a nonprofit to provide funds for people who are not able to receive mental health treatment through insurance. And so that's eventually going to be something I'd like to see eventually happen. Other long-term goals I have is to start a podcast and/or write a book, probably maybe a combination of both of those things if those allow me to be able to, if time allows me to do that. And so those are some long-term goals. I'd like to see the business be able to be successful in making mental health, at least from a perspective of, it's not therapy, but coaching perspective, be able to have a wide access for people. I think the field is changing. And so as the field is changing, we're seeing a lot more accessibility because of virtual sessions and stuff like that, but also because of social media and people talking about it and those kind of things. And the only way we're going to break the stigma of people struggling with mental health is by talking about it. And it's one conversation forward at a time. So that's kind of the long-term goals of the business, and kind of a little bit of short-term goals in there too. So that's kind of the hope
Good
for
luck.
the business.
Good luck for your goals, Mr. Patrick. And would you like to start a podcast, Mental Health 101, with me?
Well, I like to start that.
Yes, for sure. Just this podcast is created to empower those people having a mental breakdown. So, how
Hmm.
can individuals track their mental health progress through habit tracking, as I recommended in the book?
How can people track their mental health with using the habits that they're developing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I guess the immediate thing I think I can think of is that what there are some available things online that you can get what they call a BAI or a BDI, and those are specific for depression, anxiety, and so a lot of times we'll use those as or therapists will use those to help people kind of give a quantifiable number to their behavior. So it gives you a list of sort of symptomologies. So like some are anxiety related if they're BAI, if they're BDI, they're depression related. And so you can kind of track those, and when you're able to track where you're at, it gives you kind of a number of kind of overall where you're at as far as okay, if you're a 20, if you're a 30, there's certain levels, different tiers tell you how serious the symptomology is. So that's something that I think from a habit perspective, there are some things in there that are habit related. So like sleeping is one of the ones. Like we need sleep, but we need quality sleep. Sometimes when people struggle with depression, they will actually have um, they'll struggle more with oversleeping, and then that actually makes them more tired. So that's one of those things. So how do I track my quantity of sleep would be how many hours am I sleeping, but also am I sleeping on a regular routine? Meaning, am I going to bed the same time and going and getting up at the same time, no matter what the day is? A lot of times people try to adapt their sleep schedule to the weekend, and that doesn't always work. A lot of times that makes it harder on them. So that's one thing, right? That'd be a habit forming behavior you could do to track that and see kind of where you're at with it. Through those self-report scales, though, that would be a track of the actual symptoms. And so again, there might be some things in there that would be related to habits you may be doing. Most of the time, they're physical symptoms, but there are some things. Like I said, sleeping is one of them. But just being able to identify where those things are coming up, and then if that's something that's coming up, then consulting with a therapist or a coach on that, and then kind of moving forward with them.
So, Mr. Patrick, to sum up our discussion, how does the principle of compound growth apply to mental health when focusing on small, consistent habits?
Well, the compound growth aspect, and I may have, and I said I was on my audio listening to this book, so I may have not gotten to that quite that part, but I do believe that if you're talking about the idea that there a lot of the same behaviors tend to compound on one another. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. Sort of that their brain is efficient in the fact that it likes to go back to doing a lot of the same things. So if you're doing healthier behaviors, typically you'll see yourself doing more healthy behaviors because you'll feel better, and so you'll be able to say, okay, well, I can kind of build off of that. I think he gives the example where he talks about the ski team, the British ski team. So that's there, and he was talking a little about that and how they're just the way that they were approaching their habits and how they were approaching what they were doing in their life overall made a huge impact on how the team improved. And so I think a lot of especially when you're talking about positive behaviors, because we have a lot of um, because those behaviors build off one another, because you do feel better and because you are being more fulfilled, that it'll tend to maintain better. But I think it's always a situation where there's always a chance that life's going to come along and kind of run into that, and so you have to be mindful of when those things are changing, when you're noticing your own changes, and so they to go back and kind of course correct it back to where you want it to be. But I think the more consistent you are with things, that consistency is huge. Like that really changes the ability to be able to maintain it. Is that, yeah, you might have a day here or there that go off, but I know he talks about the idea of tracking every day that you were successful at whatever the habit was that you're trying to get to, and you won't want to break that chain. So that chain is really important, even if you may not feel it emotionally. You'll carry through on it more so because you're already sort of got that track, that sort of um, you have that particular streak going in that way. So those would be some things I guess I'd say from that. It tends to kind of build off one another usually.
Mr. Patrick, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your business or projects that you want to promote?
Absolutely. So you can reach me at bloomworkscc@gmx.com. That's our email. I do have a LinkedIn. So it's my name, Patrick Eilers, MALPC. You can also reach us at, we do have a YouTube channel we're starting, Bloomworks Concepts and Coaching. I'm also going to have a Patreon channel, patreon.com/Bloomworks. Those are all the main areas you can see me. And I also have some of the other podcasts I've done on the Patreon channel. So that's the best place to get in touch with me.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Patrick because if we support him, more empowering episodes, empowering business to come. So, Mr. Patrick, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Bodycon people, see you soon. So, Mr. Patrick, I have a next guest. So, but if you're interested to do a podcast, start a podcast.